think we're turning on the live stream. So just a minute.
Chairman Barhoff.
Here.
Mr. Moses.
Here.
Mr. Hawes.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Mr. Lanklow.
Tom Harris in place of Jason Lanklow here.
Okay. Ms. Higgins.
Here.
Mr. Bro.
Here.
Mr. Talavoda.
Here.
Ms. Bush.
Here.
Mr. Hardy.
Here.
Mr. Robertson.
Here.
Mr. Gray.
Here.
Mr. Bowser. Mr. Borg.
Here.
Ms. Gotro.
Here.
Mr. Daniels.
Here.
Mr. Chambers.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz. Ms. Pichon Battle.
Here, good morning.
Chief Dardar.
Here.
Mr. Verchick.
Here.
Ms. Manning Broom.
Here.
Ms. Burkett.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Kitchen. We'll move right along with the agenda with approval of the January 11th, 2022 minutes. I hope everybody's had an opportunity to review. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Ms. Manning Broom. Is there a second?
A second.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Haas. Any public comment? Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed
Aye.
say nay. All right, minutes are approved. First of two major votes today, one out of the way. And so now we'll move to welcome and opening remarks from Governor John Bell Edwards. Could not be here in person or virtually live today, but he recorded a message for everybody on this task force. So Ms. Cooper, would you cue it up and hit play?
Good morning. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. at the National Governors Association meeting, and I can't be with you in person. But I do have a few words of appreciation to share on this momentous day. I am heartened by the diversity of backgrounds and perspectives on this task force, and I'm encouraged by the integrity that you brought to the table. Seeing this process through has not been easy, but you've done it. Today, you're voting on Louisiana's first ever climate action plan, the first statewide plan in the Deep South to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero from a top energy producing state. I hope you feel a sense of accomplishment. There will certainly be more difficult conversations in the future, but today we will take a collective step towards brighter days. As hard as it was to develop this plan, the real work begins with implementation. Luckily, we can do hard things while working together. I look forward to receiving this plan and partnering with each of you. So again, thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, Lindsay. Certainly a big day today, but a lot of work ahead of us as well. So without further ado, I'll move down to the next agenda item, overview of the final version of the 2022 Louisiana Climate Action Plan. Ms. Cooper will walk us through kind of a history of the last 15 months and the final plan itself.
Okay, here we go.
And before we do, I just want to let the record reflect that Mr. Bowser is present as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chairman. And it's great to be back with you all this morning. Before we jump in, just wanted to acknowledge that we do have a final version of the climate action plan. So it's been a long time coming, but circulated this to you all last Friday evening, the 21st, for your review before the meeting today. But as Harry mentioned, it's been a lot of work over the past 15 months to get us to a place of having this action plan. So I just wanted to go back through and think through and reflect on this planning process that's gotten us here today. And it really all started with the governor's executive order that he signed at the August 2020 CPRA board meeting. This is where he adopted our emission reduction goals with an eventual goal of net zero by 2050. And he created this climate task force so that you all could help develop a plan in how do we reach that eventual goal of net zero by 2050. So over the course of August, September, October, and November, we set membership of the task force. We developed 10 subgroups underneath the climate task force. And we tried, I think, 3 or 4 times to have the first task force meeting. But of course, the reason why we're all here for climate action, it was thwarted by having multiple hurricanes that season and just made the mission of this task force all the clearer. So when you all were able to come together in the end of November, Dr. Virginia Burkett provided a great overview of climate science, just establishing why we're here at the table and why we need to take climate action now. And Governor Edwards was present as shown here, and he spoke to the task and the original mission that was set forth for all of you. So starting us very strong from this perspective that climate action must be taken in Louisiana, and urging us all on in this very rapid 15-month process. And as we moved into December, we stood up all of our subgroups of the task force around this discussion of our fundamental objectives. So what are these guiding principles and these objectives that should inform how we develop climate action? So of course, it's primarily most important to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but how we do that really matters for Louisiana. And we benefited so much from having the 6 committees and the 4 advisory groups providing input from their unique lenses on how do we develop these objectives, what is important to us in reducing emissions. And we were able to come back together in January as the task force, where Charles and I reported back out to you all on what these objectives were, and objectives that the committees and advisory groups had helped develop and inform. And that all fed into the January 2021 interim report that we had presented to all of you. Our initial draft of this interim report, as you all probably remember very well, it was very detailed on climate action and the need for action, the risks of inaction. But with input from you all, we saved that and archived it as a separate context document and created a very pared down version of the interim report to submit to the governor, where we spoke to our membership list, the charge of the task force, the process that we would undertake to make it to February of 2022, report outs from our subgroups, and a work plan of how we anticipated the next year going for the task force. And the governor received this very well with open arms, excited for the work that was ahead of all of us. And with that, we released the draft partial context sections for public comment through the end of April, which was a very helpful period for us to hear better how we can frame the impacts of climate change and account for all the different perspectives that are on our task force. But moving into February was our pivot to action. So it was from developing our planning process, setting our objectives, and turning to how are we going to take action. And in our planning process, it was a little unique from how other states have undertaken developing action plans, where they first set their high-level pathways and then develop actions within them. But because of our rapid timeline to develop this plan, we had to do both at the same time. So to get us starting to think on both of these planes at the same time, we had Eric Larson, who led the Princeton study Net Zero America, come and talk with us in the task force and all of our subgroups about different pathways to reduce emissions. So getting us in a better understanding of what these high-level options are for Louisiana. And the Climate Alliance also presented in this meeting discussing more specific policy options for our sectors. And this presentation was helpful for the committees to begin thinking about what are actions that we can be taking from this ground up approach. So this meeting also kicked off our action template. So the action development process started with this 10-page template of how are we going to develop actions. We wanted that to be very much driven by our committees, by the task force, and by the public as well. And this is where we began to dive into these two parallel workflows. Our committees met in March to talk through action development, a lot of brainstorming around strategies and actions. But our advisory group stayed at the higher level, talking through 5 hypothetical scenarios for reducing emissions, more like pathways, and understanding what are the impacts or potential impacts of different pathways that Louisiana could embark on, and how does that impact our fundamental objectives that we set at the beginning of this effort. So we broke off for most of the spring on these 2 workflows and had some really great brainstorming sessions with all of our subgroups led by their chairs that are members of the task force. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner, all of our advisory groups dove right into how are we developing and how are we evaluating our fundamental objectives. And our committees spent a lot of time thinking through these higher level strategies and more specific action steps, which was incredibly helpful for our team as we were beginning to develop and think through these various strategies and actions across sectors. And at the end of April 30th is when our public call for actions closed. As you can see on the left, we received 171 proposals, which was pretty incredible. And we are so appreciative of all the input in the beginning of this process. And we received input across all of our different emission sectors and our cross-cutting priorities, providing us a really great foundation as we moved into the action development and beginning to narrow in on what our actions were. So the June meeting of the task force was a really big meeting to report out to you all on the action templates that had been developed and also the outputs of the advisory group first consequence analysis. So their analysis of these high-level pathways. And as you can see on the bottom right, they evaluated all 5 of these hypothetical pathways against every single one of the task force fundamental objectives. And many of the outcomes that they came to is that business as usual certainly has the worst outcomes, and we need to pursue a variety of strategies. And no regret strategies include renewables, conservation efficiency, waste reduction, nature-based solutions. And there was some controversy around CCUS and industry emissions more broadly. But this conversation was the first of the task force diving into these different pathways at a high level, as well as the more specific actions that would begin to frame the second half of last year. And in the July meeting, there was even more discussion about what these strategies should look like for Louisiana, coming from the knowledge of the June meeting and the report out on advisory group analysis was able to inform how the task force was understanding and recommending strategies to inform that first version of the portfolio. And at the same time, we received a report out from David Dismukes on the final results of the GHG inventory from 2021, as shown in the bottom right-hand corner, just re-emphasizing Louisiana's unique emission profile compared to that of the broader United States, and even the data that we had in 2010 from 2005 data from the 2010 inventory. And in August and September, we had a big release of 2 documents. One was our context document, We had revised sections based on the public comment period in the first half of the year. And we wanted to put out a revised version for another round of public comment to ensure that we were on the right path and to just close any of the loopholes that we had not been thinking of from the first revision. So we released that for public comment at the end of August. And then all the way on the right, we also released this first portfolio of our climate strategies and actions. And this was our first draft, very high level strategies and adding as much detail as we could to actions, which was bringing the task force from the stage of high level scenarios down to now thinking about actions and how are we going to frame climate action in Louisiana. And as shown in the middle, the advisory members embarked on their second round of analysis. So they took this draft portfolio and then analyzed in the same way they did with the 5 hypothetical scenarios, analyzed how this portfolio would impact the fundamental objectives of the task force. And so all of these comments were released on the same day, which happened to be just a few days before Hurricane Ida. So we extended our comment period from the public on the draft portfolio and on the draft partial report, as well as the advisory group analysis through the beginning of October. And we received great feedback throughout that time and throughout having an extended amount of time for that review, for conversations, for discussing all the feedback that we had received. So at the beginning of October, we pivoted a little bit from the specific broad range of action development. We had 2 special meetings on decarbonizing industry. And through the great help of our moderator, we were able to hear from 5 different presenters in each meeting and understand what the state of the science is and the state of the research on industry decarbonization. So this first meeting was more broadly on what are the different mechanisms and ways in which we can decarbonize industry. And the second was more specific to carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And having these conversations allowed us to bring in experts with an outside perspective and inform this really important sector for decarbonization in Louisiana, an area that not a lot of other states have been able to crack or even provide recommendations for. This was very informative in the action development process as well. So with all of that information in mind, all the comments received at the beginning of October and these 2 meetings in the middle of October, the task force came back together again at the end of October to discuss all the feedback that had been received. So this was similar to the June meeting where staff reported out to the task force on the public comments that we had received, comments from sector committees, as well as the advisory group analysis the second time. And as you can see on the right side, there was more positive feedback from this draft portfolio than there was on the first set of analysis, but it showed that there was still a lot of work to do to ensure that there were less red areas and less even neutral areas, but that we were creating positive impacts to our objectives across the board of the portfolio. And on the bottom was our first modeling of the draft portfolio, which obviously we were quite far from our goal of net zero by 2050 and showed that there was also more work to be done through that portfolio. So through all of this feedback, through the task force conversation at the end of October, we then turned to revising the portfolio. So we wanted to revise the set of strategies and actions so that we were better meeting and better showing benefits to our fundamental objectives through the portfolio, and that we were also moving closer to this goal of net zero by 2050. And we did this in the revised portfolio by noting co-benefits of taking action. We called out implementing agencies, partners, and timelines. We quantified goals and metrics that would help ensure Louisiana stays on the right path and has the right level of ambition with many of these different actions. We also gave nod to examples of ongoing work and initiatives of other states as well to show where there has been a lot of momentum and where there can be more on climate action. So this was the revised portfolio released for public comment in November through December 31st. And the task force met at the end of, or in the middle of December before the holidays to discuss this revised portfolio and gave us some great feedback that we were able to take into the draft final report, which is where we brought together all the context sections that had undergone those 2 longer public comment periods. And we also brought in some of the feedback received from the task force in the December meeting. So we revised the consequences of inaction section. We more clearly noted the benefits of taking action. We revised modeling. We created portfolio section headers, an implementation table, and more clearly stated what the next steps are and the needs for adaptive management. And as you can see in this graphic, and in all of our pathway graphics, we're getting a little bit closer to our goal each time and having this iterative process of development, not only for the portfolio, but also for the whole scope of the climate action plan was really helpful to ensure that we are thinking comprehensively about the need for taking action and the ways in which we will take action. So all of that led to the January 2022 meeting, which was just a few weeks ago for us, where we talked through the final portfolio and presented you with the final modeling for Louisiana in a scenario where we do meet our eventual goal of net zero by 2050, and noting to you all any changes that were made through the draft full report, the draft full climate action plan, and to the final portfolio as well. So the final portfolio is 8 sections, 28 carbon reduction strategies, and 48 specific actions. And in the January meeting, as we talked through each of those sections of the plan and strategies and actions, I also overviewed the process for dissenting to action in the climate action plan. We had provided, for the visibility of the public, we provided our members with a Google form that they could fill out, noting the action number, the title, and a brief reason why they would like to submit formal dissent to an action. And as you can see on the right, this is how we framed it in the climate action plan that I circulated to you all on the 21st. So right below the action where there was any dissent notated, we noted how many members objected, why was there disagreement, and then who the dissenter was. But I'm excited to report out to you all that 55 of the 84 actions were without any dissent. So 29 actions had dissent to them. No action had more than 5 dissenters, and 18 of them only had 1 dissent. So I will take us through all 8 of the sections of the portfolio, just at a high level to discuss where the dissent was. And you all have the full version of that in the climate action plan that I circulated. The full dissent is noted in an appendix. So the raw comments that were received and the raw reasons why there was dissent. And again, they're synthesized in the portfolio, in the final portfolio itself. So looking at the first section on clean energy transition, we had 2 strategies in this section. And we had 7 dissents expressed in this section, and most of them were on this first strategy. In action 1.1, there were 2 members who dissented to this action, one with opposition to the inclusion of 20% non-renewable clean power in the portfolio standard. And there was one opposition to the 20% limitation of non-renewable clean power, which was very in line with comments we've received throughout this whole process, that some actions go too far and some go not far enough. On 1.2, there was 1 objection to this action, disagreement on the inclusion of low carbon power generation and the perpetuated use of fossil fuels and potential deployment of blue hydrogen. Similarly, on 1.4, there was 1 objection to this action with a similar concern over the inclusion of non-renewable clean energy and perpetuated fossil fuel use and deployment of CCUS. On 1.5, there were 2 dissents to this action. One member cited concerns about electric grid reliability in a deregulated environment. And the other supported this action, but objected to limiting PPAs to renewable power and not also including clean power generation. In 1.6, there was a dissent to this action expressing concern that a specific transmission expansion goal is premature, and we should do further study before we set a target of expanding transmission. Transitioning to strategy 2, there were 2 dissents on action 2.4. One member had, again, concerns on the reliability of the electric grid in a deregulated environment, and the other member supports the concept, but objected to possible exclusion of clean power generation. So similar concerns were raised in 2.4 and then 1.5 as well. But all in all, no dissent was made on 6 actions of this section. So we can say that there was unanimous support or non-opposition to 6 actions of that section. As we transition to industrial decarbonization, as we anticipated, I'm sure as all of you anticipated too, we had the most dissent on this section of the portfolio. Overall, there were 22 dissents expressed on this section. And we'll start in strategy 3. There were 3 expressed there on 2 different actions. And on action 3.3, there was a dissenting view from one member while supporting a cap on emission that trading regimes could allow for continued emission. And there's also a possibility of double counting emission reduction. In 3.4, there were 2 objections to this action opposing the idea of increased regulation that could outsource GHG emissions to other nearby states that have fewer regulations. On 4.1, there were 2 objections to this action, citing a preference for market forces rather than regulation to drive industrial efficiency. And similarly, in 5.1, there were 2 dissents expressed on this action with raising very similar concerns, preference for market forces over increased regulation to drive industrial electrification. 5.2 had 3 dissents on the inclusion of low carbon hydrogen and perpetuated use of fossil fuels, because that action was speaking to low and no carbon hydrogen, fuel switching. And action 3.5 was our action with the most dissents, but even with the most dissents, it was 5. So there was still a majority of support for that. On this action, there were concerns over high project costs, low project success rates, perpetuation of community harm and injustices, and perpetuation of environmental degradation on 5.3. On 5.4, there were 3 dissents on this action, also citing opposition to new markets that could incentivize CCUS, so actions that could incentivize use of action 5.3 and subsequently perpetuate fossil fuel usage. In 5.5, there were 3 dissents to this action. One member raised opposition to the perpetuation of industrial clusters because it can increase pollution for neighboring communities. And 2 other members opposed promotion of CCUS hubs inside of these industrial clusters and don't think that the hubs could be developed in a way that meaningfully considers nearby communities. And lastly, action 6.2 of this section brings one dissenting view, rejecting the promotion of recycling plastics instead of calling for an end of unnecessary plastic production. But all in all, across this section, there was no dissent on 4 actions of this section, but very much as we expected and as we discussed in our previous climate task force meetings, this was the most controversial section for Louisiana in climate action. Turning now to the methane section, we had 2 strategies here and 2 dissenting views posed on each of them. In 7.1, there was 1 objection to this action with concern that language would allow landowners authority to sue responsible parties. And in 7.2, there was objection to this action, citing previous legislation that could address some of the issues raised in this action, such as addressing funding, improvements of the law, and a creation of state level committees that review the process of legacy infrastructure. Then turning to strategy 8, monitoring and regulating methane emissions, there were 2 dissents expressed here as well. On 8.1, there was an objection citing opposition to the reference and connection to the net zero industry standard of 3.4. So the same member had objected to that action. And in 8.2, there was one objection to this action opposing the premise of constant monitoring instead of the elimination of fossil fuel extraction as the most effective way to reduce leaks. But there were 3 actions on this section without any dissent. Transportation development in the built environment is a very big section of the plan with 5 different strategies underneath it. But there were only 2 dissents expressed on this section. In 9.1, there was an objection to the use of alternative fuels that rely on industrial grains and perpetuate harm to communities and the environment. On 9.2, the dissent was to the use of alternative fuels, again, that rely on industrial grain, natural gas, methane, and biofuels that harm communities and the environment. But across this whole section, there was no dissent on 21 actions, which is a huge win for the transportation section. Natural working lands also received 2 dissents. The first was on strategy 15, action 15.3. There was one objection to this action opposing the sale of coastal wetlands as offsets for continued greenhouse gas pollution. And then on 16.7, there was dissent on the inclusion of wood pellets as a climate solution, raising concerns over climate and environmental impacts. But no dissents to 12 actions of the natural working land section. Second to last, we have the inclusive low carbon economy. 3 strategies of this section. We had 4 dissents expressed across 2 separate actions. First is the action 18.2, opposing the inclusion of clean energy, so non-renewable clean energy, and perpetuated use of fossil fuels and fossil fuel-based technology. In 19.1, there were 3 dissents to this action, with 2 members objecting to the inclusion of low carbon hydrogen as an industry that Louisiana should promote, and then 1 member objecting to an agency-focused implementation, posing or offering concern about agencies leading implementation here. But there were no dissents on 6 actions of this section. The collaboration and partnership section was just it brought together a lot of work of other actions. So there was not dissent that was annotated in this section, since strategies were just a reiteration of other sections in the plan, not providing new action items. And further, this was at the strategy level and not at the action level. On accountability, there were 3 different strategies of this section, and we had 5 dissents that were expressed here. So on action 26.2, 2 dissents were raised because of deployment of CCUS being a foregone conclusion and opposing the assumption that siting and permitting could have minimal impacts. On 26.3, there was one objection to this action because it didn't include specific requirements to follow federal laws and declarations that protected the rights of Indigenous people. So it was the way that it was framed in the action was more broad, and there was dissent on it needing to be more specific. In strategy 27, there was one dissent on 27.2, expressing concern that codifying the climate task force in statute would jeopardize opportunities to change based on evolving market conditions, and that the executive branch already has the authority it needs to meet objectives of this action. And the last dissent in strategy 28 was about 28.1, and I apologize, it says 27.2 on the slide. I'll change that. So on 28.1, there was one dissenting view asserting that DEQ already has and currently exercises its authority to monitor greenhouse gases where necessary. And just as a reminder, that action was focused on creating a GHG monitoring program. But 6 actions of this section had no dissent posed on them. So that is the overview of the past 15 months of this work, and also the dissent that was raised on the climate actions. And this is really the only change that's been made to the portfolio, is adding a dissent underneath each action. Again, they're summarized in the document itself, but all of the raw comments received are provided in the appendix of the document. And Chairman, if I may, before I turn it back over to you, there was a request last meeting from Bill Robertson on creating a more comprehensible and higher level overview of the climate action plan. We certainly agree that this was very necessary. So we created a 4-page executive summary of the climate action plan. And I will zoom in here to talk through these sections very briefly. This executive summary speaks to the context section and the actions of our plan, but again, at a very high level, starting with our objectives, noting the primary purpose of this plan is reducing emissions, but we have a lot of goals, and then segueing into why climate action is so critical for Louisiana. This section frames a lot of the National Climate Assessment keys that we took away for Louisiana. And then the second page is overviewing our greenhouse gas emission profile, how Louisiana's emissions are different than other states, and why we have such a unique challenge in reducing emissions because of the industrial sector. We then frame the pathway to net zero for Louisiana and our 3 big pillars of decarbonization that are shown in the graph, but we pulled those out to talk through those interconnected policy pillars and the opportunity for Louisiana to lead by example in industrial decarbonization. The third page is overviewing the climate strategies and actions at a very high level. So we just provide the section cover pages and the strategy names here. And the last page overviews what the task force is, all the different groups that are involved, as well as the timeline that has gotten us to this point, and the notation of ongoing implementation. And we also provide the opportunity for more resources and for access to our webpage, to our YouTube channel, our inventory, the EPS tool, and a way to contact us. And we are planning to print these alongside our plan. And the way that we're going to print this is 11 by 17. So this is, as you can imagine, on the left side is the back page, the right side is the front page. And then in the middle would be the GHG emissions and the overview of strategies and actions. So we wanted to provide some of our favorite or our best graphics, but also an overview of some of the impacts and the strategies and actions here. So I'll be sharing that with you all today and encourage you all to distribute that to your networks. We'll also be printing copies of the executive summary as well as our plan that we will certainly distribute to all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. And just to clarify, this executive summary, while helpful, it will be a separate document. And so we won't be asking for a vote to formally incorporate it into the climate action plan, especially recognizing that none of y'all had an opportunity to review it ahead of time. The planning team was working vigorously through the weekend to get it ready to this point. So it would be a companion document summarizing from the governor's office, but not one that we're asking for the task force to approve. Just to clarify, if there's any concerns with that. Thank you, Ms. Cooper, for the summary of the last 15 months. It's amazing what you can consolidate into 15 months, consolidated into 30 minutes. Tremendous amount of work that this task force has done. And so I applaud every one of you. I'll open up to questions for Ms. Cooper, though.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Robertson.
Thanks for the executive summary. I hope it's in plain English. You came within 2 pages of my goal, which is great.
Well, there's lots of, yeah, but we included a lot of images, so hopefully that, that allows for the 2 additional pages.
Well, that's great. I think it's very important to have a document like that to send out to the folks. And obviously it's can be formatted for transmission electronically.
Yes, definitely.
Good. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Colette. Lindsay, I also appreciate the summary. I hope we can at least have that translated into Spanish and Vietnamese. Maybe we could have our the governor's office commit to making sure that all the residents of the state can at least understand the summary. I thought it was really great. That was really great. Thank you.
Great point. That's something that we commit to. Any other questions from our members? All right. Hearing none, we will move into our next agenda item, resolution to approve the 2022 Climate Action Plan. And so staff has drafted and circulated a resolution. I'll read that aloud. We can then, assuming there's a motion and a second, have discussion of the task force members. We'll then open up to public comment ahead of a vote, and then we'll do a roll call vote. But the resolution as drafted is a resolution approving the Louisiana Climate Action Plan for submission to Governor Edwards, the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Board, and the appropriate legislative committees. And it reads, whereas through Executive Order JBE 2020-18, Governor John Bel Edwards created the Climate Initiatives Task Force to bring stakeholders from diverse perspectives together to make recommendations for reducing greenhouse gas emissions originating in Louisiana to net zero by 2050. And whereas pursuant to Executive Order JBE 2020-18, by February 1st, 2022, the task force shall submit a report, including its recommendations, to Governor Edwards, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Board, and the appropriate legislative committees. Therefore, be it resolved that on January 31st, 2022, to comply with the directives in Executive Order JBE 2020-18, the Climate Initiatives Task Force approved by majority roll call vote the Louisiana Climate Action Plan circulated prior to and discussed at the January 31st, 2022 Task Force meeting. And therefore, be it further resolved that pursuant to the Executive Order, the Louisiana Climate Action Plan approved at the January 31st, 2022 Task Force meeting be submitted to Governor John Bel Edwards and the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Board and the appropriate legislative committees. So kept it pretty tied into the executive order requirements. So with that resolution having just been read aloud, is there a motion from our membership to approve the resolution?
I'll make a motion to approve, Harry.
We have a motion to approve the resolution by Ms. Gautreaux. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Manning Broom. Now open it up to discussion from our task force members.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Robertson.
This is going to drive you crazy, but is it too late for dissents?
I think so. But feel free to elaborate if you feel like you need to elaborate.
Well, just one brief point. I think it's important for us to have a climate score for new industrial projects. And I don't know quite where to put that in the action plan. I have some ideas on that, but I just think it's important going forward. We all know what LED likes to pursue and what industry likes to do here in Louisiana, and it's projects that use a lot of fuel, and generate a lot of greenhouse gases. And I think if we don't score these projects, especially the ones that want tax breaks, I think we're missing out.
Gotcha.
So I would put that on LED to work with DNR and the DEQ and the climate task force to score these projects that they want to bring to the state going forward.
Gotcha. Well, unfortunately, it is too late to add to the climate action plan now, given where we are. But certainly, I think there's opportunities in the comprehensive, approach that's outlined in the plan, for addressing industrial emissions that you could pursue, further discussions and further develop that idea moving forward. Because certainly, industrial emissions are an area of focus. So even if it's not a part of the explicit part of the plan, there seems like there's plenty of opportunity to pursue that after today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll put it in a letter to the governor.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tyler Gray.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit? So I heard you read the resolution, and I just try to get a sense of how this meeting and discussion will be memorialized as part of that resolution. I know we've talked about the dissents and things like that, but will the resolution be included with the plan? Will there be additional commentary? Just trying to get a sense of what the packet will look like that's actually delivered.
Yes, so the resolution with the roll call vote would be part of the appendix, along with the executive order itself to memorialize its approval. And as Ms. Cooper mentioned, the dissent will also, the full dissents will be appended as well, to the end of the report. And as Lindsay went over, the dissents themselves were summarized underneath each of the actions.
Got it. And so LaMoga will be submitting an additional letter to provide context to some of the dissents. I've really appreciated and enjoyed working on such an important issue. We did end up having more dissents that we had a lot of conversation within our membership about what we would ultimately submit on. The standard that was created, the grave concern, there were some things that did not necessarily rise to that, but we still took time to analyze it as we continue to want to collaborate. And so with that, I just want to make sure that yourself and staff know that we have an additional appendix letter to give some context around some of the dissents, and just want to share that information. But again, I've enjoyed the process and working with everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Pichon Battle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, like Tyler, want to just mention that this has been a really great process to be a part of, and hats off again to the governor's staff. This is definitely a step forward. In my opinion, it is a very small, tiny, little bitty step forward, but it is a step forward. And I want to acknowledge that forward motion is what builds momentum. And this plan, as Lindsay mentioned, does have lots of things that we all agree on. And I hope that that's something, that we can start to move and build momentum towards. But there is something I want to mention just in discussion, which is that this entire process has been rooted on the premise of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And while I think this is, in fact, what we ought to be doing, it feels like we had the opportunity to use this not as a goal, but as a means to achieve a greater goal. And I think we've missed that opportunity to really put the people of Louisiana's land and its future at the center. And instead, we really focused on, the math, the statistics, the science, and all of these things are the right ways to go. But I want us to take a moment to acknowledge that what we're fighting for here is Louisiana's future and Louisiana's people and Louisiana's communities. This is a step forward, and Lord knows on climate change, we've got to do something. But I hope that as we submit this to the governor, assuming this passes, that we don't just do something anymore, but we have the courage to do the right thing. This means we're going to have to address reducing our industrial production. This is not just about what technologies we can put out into the world to try to balance the dirty things we put into the air. It means we're going to have to actually slow down, stop, halt the production of the bad things that harm our soil and our air and the communities that are next to them. We've got our seas rising, we're losing land, we're seeing relocation, these storms are getting stronger. At some point, we have to have a conversation about the climate crisis and its impact on our communities, not just the atmospheric reductions of science and numbers. This is much deeper than that. With that said, it's been a great lesson for me to be a part of this process. I hope that we can see this not as the ceiling or the top of what we should do, but the absolute floor and minimum of what we should do. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this task force. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Duchamp Battle. Professor Chambers.
For the benefit of those who are watching, my name is Terry Chambers. I'm an engineering professor and director of the Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Center at UL Lafayette, and I'm here as a representative of the state's academic community. I believe this climate action plan is a good first step. What this report shows is that it's possible to achieve the governor's emission reduction goals for the state, but only if we take immediate, determined, and sustained action. Fortunately, many of the recommendations, such as increasing the use of renewable energy for power generation and promoting energy efficiency, are steps we can take right now with no regrets. Other recommendations will require us to make significant changes to the way we do business. This may seem hard, especially in a state that tends to think of itself as an oil and gas state. What I hope we can all understand and embrace is the fact that the global energy market is moving towards a cleaner energy future, whether we like it or not. And the state will need to adapt in order to survive economically. Fortunately, I believe that Louisiana is very well situated to make the clean energy transition because many of the skills and facilities that now primarily serve the oil and gas industry can be readily adapted to also serve the clean energy market as well. Our upstream industries can prospect, design, finance, and develop renewable energy projects all around the world in the same way that we currently do for traditional energy projects. And our manufacturing facilities here in Louisiana can build out the necessary clean energy infrastructure. For example, we can design, build, operate, service, and maintain offshore wind platforms just as well as offshore oil platforms. And our downstream industries can focus on clean energy production, storage, and transportation. There's no reason Louisiana can't become a net exporter of renewable energy, whether that energy takes the form of green hydrogen or electricity that flows through upgraded transmission lines. And with proper training, Louisiana workers can benefit from the clean energy revolution. And our institutions of higher education can play a significant role in helping Louisiana manage this energy transition through clean energy research, education, workforce development, economic development, and educational outreach. I believe that this climate action plan presents a bold vision for the state that will allow Louisiana to remain a dominant force in the global clean energy market in the coming decades. And for that reason, I will vote to approve the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chambers. Mr. Byrd.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say it's been a pleasure to serve as a member of this task force, and I applaud everyone's efforts, all the other task force members, and of course, the governor's staff, Harry, you, Lindsay, Charles, have been exceptional. I also appreciate all the public input we've received, and especially the input Mr. Robinson and I have received as part of our subcommittee that I co-chair with him. Today, I'll be voting in favor of the climate action plan, subject to the specific dissents that I have lodged. Outside of those specific dissents, I need to note that I do not support each of the action items presented in the plan, but I do believe that they appropriately direct further discussion and debate to the appropriate jurisdictional entities that should address those issues, namely the Louisiana Public Service Commission and the Louisiana Legislature. Overall, I personally am aligned with the governor's goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and as a representative of energy, our goals of achieving net zero emissions by 2050 are also aligned with those of this task force and the governor. I truly believe that we'll need a whole host of strategies to get there, many of which we probably haven't even contemplated yet. But the ideas presented through our collective work over the last 18 months present a critical greening framework for us to evaluate the best strategies to move forward. And for that reason, I will be supporting the Climate Action Plan. And I thank you for all your work, Harry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrd. Mr. Daniels.
Let's see here. Good morning, everybody. Similar to Ms. Pichon Battle and Dr. Chambers and others, I just want to thank the team and the members of the task force. This has been a really strong and good effort, sometimes a really tough effort to come to the place that we are with this climate action plan. And we very much want to call out and point to the people of this community, the activists, the advocates, the scientists, and others who along the way have helped keep us on track to stay focused on what's good for Louisiana's people. And this climate action plan as presented gives us a fighting chance. It is, as Colette said, a beginning, a floor. And I'm really proud of the accountability steps that have been included to ensure that Louisiana's people and those of us who are looking forward to a climate just future and saving our people and the state have a fighting chance to do that work. And so I'm proud to have been a part of this work. I'm pleased with the staff and the team who have responded to very disparate interests and folks pushing and pulling to make sure that we can get to a place where we can move this work forward. I'm really proud to be a part of this. I will be voting in favor of the plan in the context of the significant dissents that we have set forth, and we hope to continue to be a part of a process to hold the state and each other accountable to move towards something that's going to work for our people. I appreciate you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniels. Mr. Lambert.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity here this morning. And I certainly appreciate the remarks of Mr. Robertson about our agency, Louisiana Economic Development. Appreciate all the viewpoints of our fellow task force members and really all the work that's gone into the last 15, 16 months to get to this point. I guess as I tried to indicate in my brief remarks at our prior meeting in January, LED, we put a lot of thought into our page and a half of remarks that we submitted on December the 31st. And I certainly encourage anyone to review those to kind of get some insight of our thinking right now and where we're going as the Economic Development Agency for the state of Louisiana. But I can tell you this, that I believe that we can do both. We can reduce emissions and we can make progress towards our net zero goals over the next several decades. And we can continue to provide economic opportunity to our citizens and to our businesses. And as Professor Chambers indicated, be a leader in this energy transition. I can tell you that's what we're doing every day when we come to work. And whether that's in Baton Rouge or that's in other parts of the state or that's in other parts of the country or the world, frankly. So again, thank you for allowing us to be part of this effort. And we certainly look forward to continue to be part of the discussions and the planning and the work. And I think the hard work that really will begin after February 1st and after tomorrow. So Harry, again, hats off to you and your team. Thanks again. And thanks again to fellow task force members.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Chief Parfait Dardar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Of course, first and foremost, I want to thank our governor, for putting this charge to the state and for, of course, the staff and the task force members. Of course, as an Indigenous representative on this task force, it's no secret that for many generations, Indigenous voices have been fairly silent. So we are extremely grateful for being included and having our voices heard in all of the efforts that have been ongoing over the past 15 months. And extremely thankful for all of the diversity that is seen in the task force itself, because we do understand that Louisiana is facing some extremely diverse challenges. And it is only in our diversity that we are going to come up with the solutions to ensure that Louisiana continues for our future generations so that they have a beautiful Louisiana to love and appreciate just as we have. And really honored to have been here with all of you. And I thank you for the time that we have spent together in creating positive progress. So thank you and many blessings.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Tim Hardy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank other members of the task force. I'd like to thank members of the advisory committees that did such great work. And I'd also like to thank the members of the governor's staff. You have performed yeoman's work in working with this task force and in putting together a plan that I think is indeed a great beginning. I've seen a period go from a time when climate change was doubted by some. I saw a period of time when people thought it might be a possibility, until today when it is not speculative by hardly anyone. We're seeing things happening all around us in terms of weather events, climate events. No question we have to act now. Is this perfect? Likely not. It is a great beginning. I think it is. Accents are important in this process, but we shouldn't ignore the dissents. I think they're important too. It's just that we have a process where voting will prevail. I am honored to serve as a member of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System Board of Supervisors. I'm also honored to serve on the executive committee of the Association of Community College Trustees. My point is, workforce training as we transition to a better environment, to a carbon-free environment, to the reduction of greenhouse gases, training our workforce is, I think, vital. So let me just say, for somebody that's been involved in some of these issues for a very long time, I learned so very much through this process. I think the nature of this task force, I think the different levels of expertise from different communities, and also the public's comments have been vital and important. So let me just again say, I'm honored to have had a chance to serve, and I will be voting in favor of the plan with the understanding that it will be an ongoing process. And again, I think the dissents should continue to be heard and paid attention to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Ms. Camille Manning-Broom.
Thank you so much, Harry and everyone. I'd really like to just express my gratitude to the governor for taking on this initiative and setting the table with such a diverse group of people who all have different perspectives and come from different backgrounds and may see and have different visions for the future of Louisiana. But I know that we all care deeply about this state, and it gives me joy to have been around the table and working with you all. I won't reiterate all of what has been said, certainly support many of the comments that have been made. And I just want to highlight the importance that this plan be put into action. And the way to do that is going to be through, direction provided to the governor, to the states, setting the table continuously, not just with members of this task force, but other partners such as the Public Service Commission, and that our state agencies need the capacity to prioritize and implement this work, which we'll need to be able to see in budgets and staffing. If this is about enforcement, this is about creating new departments within agencies to go after resources and bring in money to build out this infrastructure. And so I just want to emphasize that implementation matrix. I hope there is staff capacity and resources put towards the agency staff to see all of this through. And I also want to follow up on Tim and Tyler's comments. I think it's important that the governor does understand the dissent, since many of us, have not been able to talk about this in a group. And there are real concerns, and those concerns are not going to go away. And so if we want this to be successful, there needs to be a broader conversation around that. And so perhaps as a follow-up, there could be a larger briefing with the governor, focusing on the different areas of dissent to just lay all the cards out and really understand and see where people are coming from. We'll be able to move forward stronger if we understand those different lenses, if we understand those concerns, and if we address them. So again, I will be voting in favor of this. It is a wonderful first step. It's great to have a plan. I'm so proud of this effort. And thank you to the GOCA team and all the other task force members for all of your work.
Thank you, Ms. Manning-Broom. Mr. Bowser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the Governor's Climate Task Force initiatives. We have filed dissents on several pieces of this, and we intend to follow up with dialogue, both with the administration as well as with perhaps some members on this committee. Our members are committed to reducing emissions. We've done that over the last several years, and it's been done without any legislative mandate to do that. And so we look forward to working with the state and others in not only achieving it, but achieving it in a way that does not do undue harm to Louisiana as an economic engine. And I think that's what we should strive for and keep that in mind. We're focused on reducing our emissions. We think it's important. We also think that it's important not just to us as industry or to the individuals on this committee, but it ought to be important to every citizen, and everyone has a part to play in reducing the emissions that we're trying to do for our state. So in closing, I just want to say that we're happy to participate in this. We look forward to continuing this dialogue, because I think that's going to be the key, is that we continue to talk about this and look for ways to not only reduce emissions, but to move our economy forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to participate and look forward to more discussions on this.
Thank you, Mr. Bowser. Any other comments from our task force members before opening it up to public comment? Yeah, Ms. Manning-Broom.
Oh, we don't celebrate people enough, and I want to just celebrate you, Harry, and you, Charles, for everything you've done. And I think we should all do a whole nother round of applause to Lindsay, who poured her heart and soul into this. I mean, she's gave so much to this. We've all had so many conversations with her. She worked days and nights to pull this together. I am so grateful to her and to everyone else, but she is amazing. So I wanted to thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Here to Lindsay. Everybody, give a round of applause. The nights and weekends were real. The tremendous amount of heart that she put into this, I think, shows in the documents and in the interactions that she's had with each and every one of you. I think it's just really outstanding effort, and I think we're all quite proud of you, Lindsay. So Great. Job well done.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right. And Mr. Verchick, Professor Verchick.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to articulate that thing. That's a wonderful gesture. Thanks a lot, Camille, for making sure we do that. This is an extraordinary first step. We are a state that is unique in the country in our ability to generate emissions, and it's because of that we shoulder so much of the burden of industry here in the state. If we can accomplish what we've said, we will be showing the entire world a key to unlocking this climate crisis, because nobody has figured out the decarbonization of heavy industry. We have a plan to do it. Which won't exist if we don't have traction on this issue. But we are at the same time showing the rest of the world how to combat climate change if we push forward with this. The thing I think to understand is as much as I'm happy about what everyone on the committee has done, because we're extraordinary people, I admit, right? And people in the governor's office and the governor is to be commended too. But our next piece of the agenda, which is the public, I just want to say those are the people I think who matter the most to the future of this state, because the real work is going to happen in the governor's office, of a succeeding governor, after that, work of the legislature, and work of the Public Service Commission, and work of many local governments and tribal governments and other groups in the state. And that work doesn't continue at scale unless the public holds people accountable, and unless the media covers these stories, and unless all of us, teachers, people who work in politics, people who work in industry, put the state of the southern coast of Louisiana absolutely first. And so I think this is a portal that we have created to push all of that energy and support. And I just pray that we all feel the pride, not just today, but as we continue, because we have the possibility of saving this state and helping the rest of the world reach its climate goals. That won't happen today. It's going to happen over many, many years, and we cannot ever give up.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Manning-Broom, do you still have your hand up for an additional comment? Or no? No? Okay. And Mr. Bowser, I suspect do you have an additional comment, or is that just an
Mr. Chairman, this is Colette. I have a quick question just about process.
Okay, all right. Ms. Pichon-Battle, and then if Mr. Bowser, if you do have another comment, we can get to you after that. Yes, Ms. Pichon-Battle.
So we're voting today, and then what happens? Is there an official release of the plan? Can we hear a little bit more about what happens after this vote goes through, and then how this goes out into the broader public?
Yes, we will transmit this, to the governor and the CPRA board. The appropriate legislative bodies will also issue a press release, sharing this with the press. We'll have the plan up on our website and distribute it as widely as we possibly can. And so certainly appreciate any of you who wish to share the plan in its final form, with your own networks and distribution networks and communities. That would be fantastic. Because yes, the goal is to spread this far and wide.
And is that as of today? Or
as of today?
Are we waiting? Okay.
Yep. After approval, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anything else to add, Ms. Cooper?
I would just add that I'll circulate to you all the final version of the plan. We're going to add a letter from the chair and an appendix, this resolution as well with the final votes. So I'll send that to you all this afternoon, and the executive summary. The governor's office will release a press release this afternoon, and then we'll have all the documents up in live.
Good question, though. Mr. Bowser.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that will also include the dissents as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Right, any other? Oh, Dr. Burkett.
I was just wondering, there's a few editorial, there were some errors, very minor, and I just want to be sure before we go, and unless we don't come back for more discussion before the vote, there's some errors in the report. Like when we cite the National Climate Assessment, there's been 4 of them, and only on a few of them we don't have which ones where the figure was actually drawn from. And in another place, we say the National Academies wrote the climate assessment. That's not correct. A few other editorial changes. And also I have some comments on next steps that I can save or I can present now.
I'll just note that we did do some copy editing that we said we would in our last meeting. So, just non-substantive, just kind of scrivener errors, typos, that kind of thing has been cleaned up over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, well, I've got a few more in the most current, but as long as we can accommodate those copy type edits where true errors exist. Correct, and again, I have some comments on behalf of the SAG co-chairs, but it's about next steps, so I can save that if you like.
It's your pleasure, whether you want to save that for the next steps agenda item or before the vote. It's your decision.
Yeah, I'll just save and would like to comment during the next step session.
Okay, very good. And I trust that, please, if anybody has an objection to correcting some of these citation or scrivener errors or typos, please let me know if there's an objection. Otherwise, we will proceed with making those final copy edits. Very good. Any other comments from our task force members? All right, we will now move into public comment. We'll first go to the attendees on the Zoom. So if you have a comment, please raise your hand. We'll elevate you. All right. Robert Demarez Sullivan. Let's see if I can get this. All right. Robert, are you able to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vorhoff.
Go ahead.
All right, I don't know how to do the camera. I'm with the First Unitarian Church in New Orleans. I was born and raised in Lake Charles, second only to Cancer Alley in its effects on pollution. I want to express my admiration for the time you all have taken. And I know it takes energy, thought, and passion to complete this work. But being from Lake Charles, I'm concerned about putting this into effect. First of all, I have serious questions about carbon sequestration. The land of Louisiana is not actually capable of retaining the carbon under high pressure. But I really want to comment on something larger than that. For me, it's remarkable how weak these legal political responses have been. The failure of so many global summits make it plain that our politics are subject to finance. There are too many special interests and economic interests, and they trump the common good and manipulate information so that our plans are affected. I hope your plans are not affected. And I just want to draw attention to that so that in going forward, we'll be totally aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Russell. Be able to come off mute now.
Yeah, thank you. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Russell. I'm the Climate Justice Program Director at Foundation for Louisiana. I'm also a member of the Equity Advisory Committee. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate all of the work that has gone into the climate task force and the plan as we have it. I am very grateful for the leadership of everyone on the task force, everyone on the advisory committees, and the subcommittees more broadly. I want to encourage us to, again, pursue ways to be accountable to this plan and to implement and not only implement, but institutionalize the actions in this plan. I want to acknowledge the dissents and encourage ongoing conversation, but to center the people of Louisiana and the communities that we know have been impacted by decades and generations of these decisions, that we actually find ways to make real these tangible steps that we've articulated, but really find ways to resource them. I think it's really important to acknowledge that this plan and how it can show up is really dependent on which paths and which actions we choose to prioritize. And so I want to encourage all of us, again, to center the people of Louisiana as we take those steps forward. Thank you again to Harry, to Lindsay, to Charles, to everyone who's been deeply engaged in this work. I really appreciate your efforts, and I look forward to finding ways to collaborate together so that we can actually institutionalize these steps.
Thank you, Liz. Any other public comment?
We do have one public comment through the email.
Okay, in just a moment, Jonathan Leo should be able to come off mute.
Thank you, Chairman Vorhoff. I want to reiterate what many folks have already said to express my appreciation to every single member of the task force, committees, advisory groups. It's a very impressive effort that you have just completed. I also want to, as an environmental lawyer myself, as someone who has started his career as an environmental crimes prosecutor and has worked with businesses throughout my career, I understand in a very deep-seated way, both intellectually and emotionally, how critical accountability is to any kind of strategic or tactical change in law and policy. And as Professor Verchik said, what comes now is really vastly more difficult and vastly more challenging for all of you and all of the members, every person in the state of Louisiana, which is how to implement the changes that this plan calls for and to take account of the dissents. I think that the focus now needs to be on prioritizing the most important components of this plan that must be codified in order for them to be effective. And to do so as thoughtfully and as rigorously as possible. And in particular, one of the remarks that Mr. Robertson made early on in his admittedly late dissent was, how do we assess the carbon score of new projects that are coming up? That to me is environmental planning and environmental analysis. And I would suggest that as a matter of codification, section 2018, I believe it's Title 30 or Chapter 30 of Louisiana Revised Statutes dealing with environmental assessments would be a perfect place to enshrine that need to score, to put a climate score on new projects, and start making the environmental analysis process in the state of Louisiana more comprehensive from the perspective of climate change and climate action. Thank you again, all of you, for this process, and thank you for this time this morning.
Thank you for your comments. Next, go to Jesse George. Should be able to come off mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jesse George. I'm a lifelong resident of South Louisiana, having grown up in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I now live in New Orleans, where I serve as New Orleans Policy Director for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. I'm also a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and through my employment with the Alliance for Affordable Energy, I'm a policy lead for Louisiana for a Green New Deal. I had assistance in drafting these comments from Jane Patton, who is another policy lead for Louisiana for a Green New Deal. And we would like to say that this plan contains recommendations that could potentially set Louisiana on a path to meeting the goal of net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. Key measures in the plan include rapid, renewably generated electrification of the industrial sector, enforcement of a net zero industry standard, including efforts to align permitting of new facilities with the aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, investment in renewably fueled mass transit, and widespread deployment of energy efficiency and renewable energy, particularly through the adoption of a renewable portfolio standard mandating these technologies. However, the plan has significant limitations. Namely, it is not in fact a plan, but rather an unprioritized list of recommendations that provides no analysis of the relative greenhouse gas emissions reductions of the measures included. Furthermore, it fails to include permitting limits that would apply to the emissions of industrial facilities likely to be constructed in the near future. The listed measures also rely heavily on industry-promoted technologies proven to increase rather than decrease greenhouse gases, such as carbon capture and sequestration, so-called blue hydrogen, and emissions offset schemes. These false solutions will not reduce emissions locally, but will allow industry to continue poisoning both individual bodies and beloved communities in our state. As the Climate Initiatives Task Force own data shows, an astounding 66% of greenhouse gas emissions in Louisiana come from industry, compared to 17% nationally. Yet this set of recommendations assumes that industrial expansion will continue unabated. It is not a certainty that we will actually deploy this plan, much less achieve the goal at hand of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Mitigating against climate change and reducing harms to Louisiana and its people will require the coordinated efforts of state agencies at all levels, executive, legislative, and regulatory. We point especially to the Louisiana Legislature, the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources, and the Louisiana Public Service Commission as bodies that will have the responsibility of implementing these recommendations. To say that the future habitability of this state depends on the success of this plan is not an understatement, as the blue-tarped rooftops stretching from Houma to Lake Charles attest. This report must not be an end in itself, but rather a blueprint for action. Mere talk is not enough. Success can be achieved in a number of ways, which would improve on the plan as published. While the plan makes reference to engaging with federally recognized tribal nations and learning from indigenous stewardship practices, it makes no mention of the word sovereignty and includes no recommendations for the return of land to tribal nations or the formal engagement of state-recognized tribes in the implementation of the state's climate plans. Indigenous stewardship must include control of land and its resources by tribal nations, many of which are affected disproportionately by climate change and threatened with displacement. The plan also makes no plan for how to implement any of the included actions, which are strictly voluntary suggestions. The task force and its subcommittee members should endeavor to continue their work in the long term to ensure some mechanism of accountability for the actual implementation and adoption of these recommendations. More than a century of economic dependence on the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries has left the people of Louisiana woefully unprepared for the climate disaster that is already a regular part of our lives. Louisiana does not have time for further inaction on climate, and half measures are useless in this fight. The good news is, if we do take action, Louisianans will have cleaner air, better health, greater safety, and a more stable economy. We simply need leaders with the wisdom to act swiftly, the vision to see through false solutions, and the courage to wrest the future of this state from the vice grip of industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, go to Rachel Sanderson. Rachel, you should be able to come off mute. Rochelle?
Yes, Harry, I'm connected. Yeah, Rachel's correct. Thank you. So I just want to say first and foremost that I'm speaking in a non-professional capacity. So I'm speaking as a resident of Louisiana, specifically from Hammond, Louisiana. So, and I really want to thank the work of all of the committees, the task force, the staff at GOCA. I know that this has been a heavy lift, and it's certainly uncharted territory for many folks. There's a quote by Pierce Brown, and it's, "Home isn't where you're from, it's where you find light when all grows dark." And I think in Louisiana, we've always been really good at finding that light when all grows dark. And I think that's one of the things that kind of speaks to me about this plan, is that this is a little bit of dark or a little bit of light in the dark that we've kind of all been experiencing for the last couple of years. So big thanks to the team for bringing that space of light in a place that we call home. This is a great step forward, and I'd like to see this work integrated across multiple initiatives across the state, whether it's through CDBG, disaster recovery and mitigation funding, the upcoming coastal master plan, the long-range transportation plans that are hosted by each metropolitan planning organization, or resilience plans across the state. And I think many have already said this, but centering the experience of those who are most impacted by climate change and considering them as the experts to follow will allow us to actually better justify the science and information that provides further evidence for the experience of Louisianans. So I think sometimes we get this a little backwards, where we are following just the science and the data and then actually going to folks on the ground to ground truth that. And I think actually flipping the narrative on that and looking to those who are most impacted, who understand their challenges the best, and saying what is the data and information that actually supports what the experience is, could be a transformative narrative for the way that we begin to approach this work in the future. And so I just want to say that and leave us with the thought of what does it also look like for those most impacted to be the decision makers in this space as well. So thank you again for all of your work, and thank you for the time today.
Thank you for your comments. We'll now move to Jane Patton.
Thank you so much, Harry and everyone, for making space today for public comment in this process. I want to add on to what my colleague Jesse and John and Robert and others have already said in response to this plan, in starting by commending this group again for just the huge heft and the amount of work and time and consideration that has been put into this plan on frankly, a rapid timeline. And thank you so much to the governor's office for that work. I want to add to the list of considerations that Jesse brought forth around how the report must not be an end in itself, to add that implementation of the recommendations for this climate action plan must also include the establishment of and adherence to standards for equity that are rooted in strengthening Louisiana's communities and that are rooted in strengthening the democratic institutions and democratic access that will be pivotal to survival and thriving among Louisiana communities and frankly among our industries and economies moving forward. You have already heard caution against the experts that Lindsay reviewed earlier that have come before this task force, who have warned against shortcuts that are more smoke and mirrors than actual emissions reductions. And as the length and depth of this plan attests, we still have a lot to do to implement the real solutions and the recommendations coming out of this committee that will ensure survival and thriving for Louisiana and its people and its economies and its environments moving forward. I and many of my colleagues are with this task force to build public support towards solutions that are rooted in justice, that are rooted in equity, and that are actually going to protect our communities and our environment from harm. We look forward to the continued and further work that will come out of this task force, the implementation across other public bodies that Jesse outlined and others have mentioned. And just want to reiterate that we appreciate the work that has gone into this and we are looking forward to all the work that we still have yet to do. Thank you all.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment? You can make a comment by raising your hand and take you off mute. Okay, not seeing any. Cooper, you mentioned there's at least one emailed in.
Yes.
Can you please read that aloud?
Absolutely. So our comment from the climate@la.gov email reads from Angel Bradford. And her comment states, "Hello, honorable members of the task force. Thank you for undertaking a valiant effort that has involved substantial time, discussion, and integration of public comment and feedback. While I do not love the term net zero, I'm grateful we have gotten to this time of a final vote and a final report. This work is assuredly just beginning, as seeing this document through the form of an actionable plan and not just a report is crucial. As we all encounter and experience the implementation phase at the legislative and agency levels, let us be reminded that no amount of compromise and no amount of money can shield us from the effects of a planet that is destroyed, should we not take these ideas within the report seriously. In order to save the planet, we must love our state enough to choose our people, to choose our clean water, our clean air, and conserve our land. And we must love our state more than we love keeping the 1% rich. Thank you for voting on this matter. Good luck to us all in the days ahead. We'll be with you in every step. In solidarity, Angele Bradford from the Sierra Club. And that is all of our comments through the email.
Very good. Seeing no additional public comment, any further final comment from the members before we move into a vote? All right, not seeing any. Ms. Kinchin, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Vorhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Moses?
Aye.
Mr. Hawes?
Aye.
Mr. Lambert?
Aye.
Secretary Harris?
Aye.
Ms. Higgins?
Aye.
Mr. Bro?
Aye.
Mr. Calavoda?
Aye.
Ms. Bush?
Aye.
Mr. Hardy?
Aye.
Mr. Robertson?
Aye.
Mr. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Bowser?
Aye.
Mr. Borg?
Aye.
Ms. Gotro?
Aye.
Mr. Daniels?
Aye.
Mr. Chambers?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Pichon Battle?
Aye.
Chief Dardar?
Aye.
Mr. Burchick?
Aye.
Ms. Manning Broom?
Aye.
Right. With unanimous approval, we now have a Louisiana Climate Action Plan, the state's first ever climate action plan. So thank you, all of you. I think at this moment, I'll take the privilege of expressing the gratitude of the privilege that I have of serving as the chair of this task force. It has been an honor of my life, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you for the months and years and hopefully decades to come on this. I also want to express gratitude for Governor John Bel Edwards and his leadership on this issue. As he will tell you, there are two ways to lead, from out in front and by example. Governor Edwards has been out in front on this issue for years now, and in creating this climate task force is now armed with the examples to show leadership through policy recommendations. And so I appreciate his leadership on this. And I also appreciate the leadership that all of you have shown by really staying with this effort and staying at the table, having hard conversations, listening to things that you might not have heard before or you maybe knew. And so I think we can, that is the best way to learn and to grow as people though. And I also appreciate the many hours of review and edits and comments that not only the task force members and advisory groups and committee members have undertaken, but also our passionate members of the public. I know, it wasn't by design that many of those hours were during the holiday season. That was just how the timelines lined up, but we are much better off, and this plan is much better off for all of your participation and the commitment that you've shown over the last 15 months, and I believe for the decades to come. I'd also be remiss if I didn't share a tremendous amount of gratitude for the Water Institute of the Gulf, and their integral participation of the planning on the planning team. They have been staff members of this effort, de facto staff members, and their commitment to this effort is truly outstanding. And we couldn't have really underpinned this effort with science and such a tremendous process without their help. And lastly, certainly not least, but Charles and Lindsay, your work on this has been outstanding and has, I think, you've represented the governor and this administration incredibly well and outstandingly. So thank you for all your work. And with that, we've heard a lot about, this is just an important step, but just one of the first steps. We're out of the starting blocks, and now we're off to the races. And so we will look at to implementation. And so our second to last comment or agenda item, next steps, Ms. Lindsay Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm excited to bring us into this next phase of implementation. As you can see, there's not much that we have laid out clearly yet, but as we spoke to briefly earlier, today is the final version of the action plan release. So we will release it to you all first and the executive summary, adding in this appendix of how members voted and making those copy edit changes based on Dr. Burkett's recommendations. This will all be posted on our website and also released in a press release by the governor's office later today. I encourage you all to release it in your own way with your organizations as well. On February 1st, we'll be sending this to the governor, and we're hoping to, at some point, bring him in on and hear from his perspective on next steps and first steps for us to take in implementing the climate action plan. And as we've mentioned in the past couple meetings, this effort does not end today. It was not in the executive order that it would end on February 1st of 2022. So we envision that the task force will have quarterly meetings moving forward, primarily with report out from agencies, stakeholders, and other members who are key partners in implementation. So we envision this first implementation discussion will be the week of March 7th. We sincerely hope that this will be in person and just want to reiterate how much we appreciate you all working on this effort throughout the pandemic. I know many of you, many of us, many of the people that we know have been sick throughout this process, and we just appreciate your steadfastness in working with us, but hope that as we move into implementation, we'll be able to meet again in person and create that regularity of meeting quarterly starting this March, where we plan to report out to you all on our implementation plan for this first year. What are the first steps we're going to take and receive feedback from you all at that point then. But I will keep you all apprised as we move forward of next steps that are coming up, of public events that are happening around the climate action plan. And we just ask that you all do the same with us, and where we can be partners for you all in moving forward with this plan. Just want to reiterate our appreciation for all of you members and your commitment to this process. And we look forward to moving forward and continuing this discussion over the coming months. And with that, I will pass back over to the chair unless there are questions on next steps.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. And Dr. Burkett, is this an opportunity to raise your question?
Yes. Yes. Let me make sure I'm off mute here.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I want to join everyone in thanking members of the task force, the governor's office, and the Water Institute in the past year and a half. It's been an interesting journey, and this is just the beginning, as a lot of people have said many, many times this morning already. And while this plan represents, I think, a remarkable step forward for our state, I think we all recognize that its success will depend upon advancements in technology and changes in policy that will enable a transformation of our carbon-intensive economy. 2 meetings ago, you'll recall that the Science Advisory Group co-chairs recommended an evaluation of the state of technological readiness of the technologies that are included in the portfolio that the task force just approved. We also recommended a very structured type of uncertainty analysis be included as an aspirational goal in the next phase of the climate action plan, that would enable the annual updates, not every 5 years, but the tracking of our progress and reflecting on Mr. Robertson's climate score for new projects. That's right along the same vein that we were recommending. We were talking about technologies more broadly, but for individual projects, developing a technique or methods for that. Those are the kinds of things that we hope will be taken up immediately by the task force in our first phase of implementation. And there are two really important reasons for the urgency in taking these and other next steps. First of all, the plan calls, we keep thinking about net zero, the plan also calls for a 26 to 28% reduction in emissions in 3 years. Okay, 28% reduction in 3 years. And second reason, we've got another, so we had 216 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2018. We've got another 120, that's like almost a 40% increase in these new permits that have been given for facility expansions and for new facilities. One of the public comments I think was spot on about the scoring of new projects. It's very similar to what Mr. Robertson said, and their environmental impacts. Another public comment echoed by the SAG 2 meetings ago was that there had been no analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions for each action. And we all accept that was not possible. But looking forward, we recommend that this be done, which will enable us to tackle another priority or to tackle priorities. I think Ms. Pichon Battle pointed out at the last meeting, what do we do first? The priorities, what's the low-hanging fruit? And one of our public comments just said, there's no prioritization. And that was something that would be enabled by this more quantitative analysis. And while some are saying we need, less statistics, a lot of the science reviews are saying, we need to focus more on the analyses of each, using the same methodological approach or structured decision-making in implementation as we have in drafting the initial plan. So I really appreciate the plan that the governor's office just laid out for immediately, not going away, coming back in a year, rather come back, we start work in March. And in advance of that meeting, I would suggest that we get some input from the advisory groups like the Science Advisory Group and the members of the task force on what are some of the recommendations, rather than the governor's office coming back and say, this is the next steps. Give everyone a chance to digest this huge, remarkable step that the state has just taken, and then reflect on what are the priorities, these next steps. We've heard several really important suggestions this morning. So I think that if you would give us all an opportunity to recommend what we think are some next steps, it would be helpful at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burkett. Certainly lots of work ahead. So I'm looking forward to reconvening in March. Any other comments from or questions from our task force members? All right. We'll then move into public comment, a final public comment for the meeting. Are there any final comments from the public? Ms. Cooper, would you also just double check the email and make sure that nothing else has come in?
No other comments have been submitted via email.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I truly commend each and every one of you. I am elated that we have now unanimously approved this plan. And I ask all of you, we will send out the final version and document materials to be forwarded as widely and as much as you possibly can, because I can't remember if it was Ms. Pichon Battle or someone else that mentioned, that the success of this effort is going to be dependent on the public engaging and really grappling with these issues and understanding and asking for more action. So really thank you for ahead of time for sharing with all of your networks, all your communities, and I look forward to reconvening in about a month. So unless there are any other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
A motion by Ms. Manning Broom, a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Moses. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Well, thank you. This concludes the meeting, and y'all have a wonderful day, a wonderful carnival season, and we'll pick it up in March.
Likewise. Bye all. Congratulations, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Here, here.